Good morning, everybody. All right, here we go. Chapter 15. We're almost done with Mark. I like next chapter. This one is it's a tough one to go through. I find that this is always one that takes a lot of time just to go through and to really see. There's so many details that you can go in. But let's get started on this one. Let's go with the very beginning here. So we've seen that now. Oops, I did the wrong thing. There we go. That Jesus was now tried in front of just the Jews, where they went and they took him, and then now it's the morning, and now it's time to actually do the trial. This is actually really interesting that trials took place first thing in the morning, and so this really lines up with that period that it says, in the morning the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes, and who the council, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and delivered him to Pilate. So here in Mark, it just kind of goes quickly through a little bit of with Pilate, but we'll see that if you actually look through all of the books of the gospel, you see that there's the trial with, he starts with Pilate. Pilate sends him to Herod because he saw that was his jurisdiction. Herod sends him back to Pilate, and so now he's back with Pilate in this portion. And so, and then Pilate tries to just punish him by beatings, but the people weren't happy with that. They wanted him to be crucified. Some interesting thoughts that I've read through different, scholars and commentators is they believe that those that were at this trial, and we'll go over this here, is that they weren't the people that were from Jerusalem that praised him and said Hosanna, Hosanna. That they tried to do this early in the morning to kind of fill that trial with people that were against him. And so a very interesting perspective, because there's many that say, oh, they just worshipped him, now they're crucifying him. But it also could have been a stuffed trial for this purpose. So then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered and said, "It is as you say." And the chief priest accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. And so here they accused him falsely of many things, but Jesus answered nothing. He didn't have to. He didn't have to try to get out of it. He knew that he could have refuted the things that were being said, but he needed to go to the cross. So then Pilate asked him again, saying, "Do you answer nothing? See how many things they testify against you?" And then Jesus still answered nothing. And why? Because he knew he needed to go to the cross, and he was going to just take it as a man, well, more than a man. I don't think very many men would take this. Actually, that's the reason why he marveled. He absolutely marveled that Jesus just stood there and just absolutely took it, because this was not common. What he would see, Pilate, is if they're on death row, they're trying everything to get out of it. But here Jesus just took it. He knew what the job needed to be done. He knew that this is the way to checkmate Satan and to bring life to all of mankind so that they could be reattached or come back to God here. So this is what Jesus, just his stoic, just absolute stance on this. So then, now at the feast, it was a custom. So the feast is the feast of the Passover. We talked about the feast of the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread. So once a year, at the feast of the Passover, he was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them, whomever they requested. And so there was one man named Barabbas who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in a rebellion. This is crazy. Absolutely crazy. So he's like, hey, here's Barabbas, because here Pilate thought that they would for sure, if he brings up the worst of the worst, then people are going to say Jesus, no problem. So then he brought him up. Then the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do as they had always done for them, which means releasing one prisoner. So this is the multitude crying out for this. And so Pilate answered them, okay, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And for he knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. Now, this is an interesting comment here, because he could see that the chief priests were trying to do this. So he's like, okay, well, the people aren't going to want Jesus to go to the cross. This is because of the doings of the chief priests. So he's like, I could see that these guys are being snakes, that they're trying to pull a quick one here. And so he realized their envy. What were they envious of? Well, I wrote it down here. Well, actually, yeah. Let's see. I think it's Andrew Wommack comments on it. The chief priests had deceived themselves and other religious people into believing that they were condemning Jesus for godly reasons. But even an ungodly ruler like Pilate could see through their lies, and religious bondage binds people to truth even more than sin. The true motivation behind the chief priests and scribes' action was just envy. They were doing all of their religious works to be seen by people, all right? So they wanted this. They wanted the recognition, but Jesus was getting more recognition than they were. And so they were envious of the recognition that Jesus was getting, and Jesus was attached to God, and he was listening to God, and he was listening to his voice. And this is why Jesus was getting the recognition, was everything that was taking place. Well, they wanted that recognition, and they thought, that they were doing all these godly things, but they weren't. And so the same thing is true of persecution today. All strife is rooted in pride. And so here, Pilate could see that it was out of envy. So he's like, okay, well, the people will cheer for Jesus. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd. Look at that. They're going around. Hey, guys, come on. It's probably their people. And this is where the thought was, that it wasn't those that were, saying, Hosanna, Hosanna. But it was their own crowd, so that they should rather release Barabbas to them. And Pilate answered and said to them again, what then do you want me to do with him whom you had called the King of the Jews? And then they cried out, crucify him. Then Pilate said to them, okay, why? What evil has he done? But they cried out even the more, crucify him. So Pilate, now wanting to gratify the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and he delivered Jesus. This was a political thing. To gratify the crowd, he released Barabbas. And what we know about Pilate is, okay, so how much political goodness did this do for your career? Well, Pilate only lasted another 5 years after this, and then he was pulled and he was sent to exile. And so interesting that, he did this to gratify the crowd, and it really only bought him, a little bit of time. And so it's just really crazy to see just that he was trying to, he himself was trying to release Jesus, but this crowd just wouldn't take it. And so then the soldiers led him away into the hall called a praetorium, and they called together the whole garrison. So the whole garrison is about 600 soldiers. So remember, this is about the same amount of people who went to grab Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And they clothed him with purple, of course, mocking him as the king, because purple is the color for royalty. And they twisted a crown of thorns. This just gets me every time, that a crown of thorns. So here, this is part of the curse. The crown of thorns were brought in when Adam and Eve sinned, and now this curse, this crown of thorns, this crown of curse was put on his head. But now Jesus was about to absolutely defeat the curse. And they began to salute him, hail King of the Jews. Obviously, they were mocking him. And then they struck him on the head with reed and spat on him, bowing the knee, and worshipped him. Of course, they weren't really worshiping. They were just mocking him. And when they had mocked him, they took the purple off of him, put his clothes on him, and led him out to crucify him. Did I have notes? I probably had notes here on this. Yeah, you know what? Verse 18. Yeah, I want to read to you guys what Andrew Wommack here said about verse 18. This is really good. It is absolutely amazing that Jesus put up with this mockery. He was God Almighty. He could have destroyed every one of these soldiers. Yeah, he absolutely could have. He could have called angels. He could have just, smited all of them. Yet, I think that's the word, smited. Anyhow, yet he humbled himself and became obedient, even unto the suffering death on the cross, but even unto the suffering of taking the mockery, taking the shame, which he took for us. And we see that this was a very tough thing to do, just even the mockery and the shame. But he did it. He did it willingly. He took it, and he knew that this was something he needed to go to. He could have absolutely crushed them, but he didn't. Then they compelled a certain man, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Why did they explain this? This is kind of cool, because Rufus is actually, there's a Rufus, and they believe it's the same Rufus who is mentioned in Romans as part of the church now. And so they're saying, hey, man, you know Rufus and Alexander, the guy that we know? So this is being written later, obviously. They're like, no, that's Simon, their dad. He's the one who carried the cross. And so it's really cool that we see that these people, they were from northern Africa, but they were there at this time of the year because of the Passover. And so they're coming to celebrate that as Jewish people. And he was coming out of the country and passing by to bear his cross. Now, Spurgeon? Yeah. Is it Spurgeon? Who is from a long time ago, or great. He's written a lot of books. He says something interesting. He says, he talks about, where was Simon Peter? He should have been the one carrying the cross. And he says, don't let another Simon take your place. And that being talking to Simon. But Simon Peter, he was still just trying to distance himself. He didn't want to be related to him yet in this point, because of all the shame and everything that was taking place. So a different Simon came. Just an interesting thought that Spurgeon had brought on. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which is translated place of skull. Then, because it looked like a skull, and so that hill, oftentimes they say there's like a hill that looked like it was a skull, but it also could be that that's where so many crucifixions were being done. So then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he did not take it. So this being, again, we mentioned this in Matthew, wine mingled with myrrh. This was like a drink that was almost like drugged up a little bit so that you wouldn't feel the pain, but he didn't want to take it. And Andrew Wommack comments on, he didn't want to take it because he wanted to feel the full ramification of everything, the sin and the beating. He didn't want to take a shortcut around it. So when they crucified him, they divided his garments, casting lots for them to determine what every man should take. And this was actually a fulfillment of prophecy. So then, now it was the third hour, and they crucified him. So this is at 9 a.m, the third hour, because they count their hours at sun, when the sun is rising, which is, it's at 6 a.m. here. And so then this is the third hour that they put him on the cross at 9 a.m. And the inscription of his accusation was written above. So here, the King of the Jews. This is important because, see, Pilate didn't care if they accused Jesus of being a god. Romans had tons of gods, and he was like, yeah, whatever. However, that they said, okay, no, he's the King of the Jews. Now this was taking Caesar's place. And so it was threatening Caesar's, because Caesar was the King of the Jews. And so then this was now a viable thing. But it's interesting because it actually is true. He is the King of the Jews, and this is what he's getting accused of truth. But to Pilate, this was a threat to Caesar. So with him, they also crucified two robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says that he was numbered with the transgressors. This was in Isaiah. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days." And so they're mocking him for this. And it's not true. Jesus is not saying he was to destroy the temple. He just said he was going to rebuild the temple. So they say to him, save yourself, come down from the cross. And he could have, but this wasn't the time to do it. He had left many times when they tried to seize Jesus, but this was not the time to leave. And likewise, the chief priests also mocking among themselves with the scribes. they said, he saved others, himself he could not save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross. And we know that Jesus could have called 10,000, angels. He could have called all these angels to come and help him, but they didn't. Let's just see here. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Verse 24. Okay, let's just see. I think here, this was a fulfillment of Psalms. This was about his casting lots for Jesus' garments, was fulfillment of prophecy of Psalms 22:18. Anyone who hung on a tree was accursed of God. So when Jesus was crucified, he became a curse for us to redeem us from the curse of God. And so this is him being on the cross, being crucified. This was also being a curse. He became a curse for us because it was said so in scriptures there. Okay, so now we go into Jesus died on the cross. Now, when the 6th hour had come, so this is now noon, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Now, this is very, very interesting. Did I write here? Was it here maybe 33? Yeah, I think it was in here. Yeah, look at this. It is not certain how far this darkness extended, but some scholars have translated this verse to read that darkness was over all the earth. It is reported that a person named Dionysius observed this darkness in Heliopolis in Egypt, and exclaimed, either the God of nature, the creator, is suffering, or the universe is dissolving. And there's actually even another remark of somebody who said, even in another part of the world at this point, that tied to this, that it had gone dark for 6 hours. And they're like, it wasn't part of the moon, because the moon was in a full moon. But how did it go dark for 6 hours? Well, that was just something celestial that took place. So it's interesting to see how there was other reports that took place during this time. And so it went dark until the 9th hour, which is now 3 p.m. And so it was the 9th hour that Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now we know that this is a prophecy. This is a fulfillment of Psalms 22. And so if we look at Psalms 22, he says, my God, this is David writing, why have you forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me? But then he says in Psalms 22, verse 3, it is because of his sin. And so this was now the sin that he has taken. And so we know why he forsook him. This is not Jesus, asking God, hey, God, why are you forsaking me? This is him now just reading out Psalms 22, but knowing that it is because of his sin that God had to forsake him. So it's really interesting to see that this is not Jesus questioning God or questioning him. This is just him fulfilling that Psalms 22. Some of those who stood by when they heard that, they looked and they're like, oh, he's calling Elijah. Well, they misunderstood him. That's not what he was saying. When he said, Eloi, Eloi, that's my God, my God. This was in a Syro-Chaldaic, I believe, is the language that he spoke this. It's actually kind of, people still discuss what language it would have been, but it wasn't the typical language, so they didn't know what he was saying, but somebody was able to translate it. So then someone ran and filled a sponge full of sour wine, put it on a reed, and he offered it to him. And now Jesus took it because it was just sour wine. This was a popular drink actually for soldiers. And so then he drank it and saying, let him alone. Oh, this is the people. Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to take him down. And then Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. We know that in John, when he cried out with a loud voice, he said, it is finished. Now, it is finished is the Greek. If you look at what it says, in Greek it says tetelestai. And tetelestai means to discharge a debt. And so Jesus is on the cross, and his last words were pretty much to discharge a debt or to execute fully, or also it could be translated paid in full. So what was paid in full? Well, this is the curse of the law. This is that Jesus absolutely fulfilled and took the wrath of God that was meant for us. And so this is not just salvation from eternity. This is like salvation from all sin, from all sickness. This is salvation from many things. And this is now Jesus saying, it is now done. It is finished. And so then when he breathed his last, then the veil of the temple was torn into two from top to bottom. Now this veil was apparently 60 feet tall. It was 30 feet wide and 4 inches thick. For this to be ripped from top to bottom, it took apparently 300 priests just to handle and manipulate this veil. And it just ripped like that. Like, that's absolutely crazy. So who did it? The disciples? I don't think so. They kind of all scattered and they left. So this, to many rabbis and this is where they saw the power of God, was that this veil got ripped. And so then when a centurion who stood aside him saw, and he cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was a son of God. This is actually, this centurion, this here is the first recorded convert after Jesus' death. Then there were also women looking on from afar. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, James the Less is his name, and Joseph and Salome, and also followed him and ministered to him when he was, so these are the people that ministered to him when he was in Galilee, and many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. Now, when evening had come, because it was preparation day, that is the preparation day before the Sabbath, they needed to take him off the cross because he can't be on the cross during the Sabbath. Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member, John actually calls him a secret disciple. If we look at that quickly, I think it's just right up here. Yeah. John said a secret disciple because of the fear of the Jews. So he was a secret disciple, just like Nicodemus. He went and awaiting for the kingdom of God. Okay, wait. Prominent who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, coming and taking courage, went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Now, Pilate marveled that he was already dead, because a lot of people actually stayed on the cross and that were crucified up to 9 days. So for it to be in 6 hours, he was marveled at that. And he actually summoned a centurion to just go make sure he was dead, because he didn't want Joseph to take his body before he was actually dead. So when he found out from the centurion, then he granted the body to Joseph. And then the fine linen, then he bought fine linen, took him down and wrapped him in this linen. And we see that in John, he did this with Nicodemus. But this here fulfilled with Joseph, because Joseph was a wealthy man. This also fulfilled that, yes, he was hung between two transgressors, but also he was buried with the wealthy, with the rich, it talks about. So this is where it comes in. And so then he did this, and then Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph observed where he was laid. This is very interesting, because I like to see that, the disciples just were scatterbrained. They were everywhere. But these women, they had their senses, and so did Joseph of Arimathea, and so did Nicodemus. They weren't losing their minds. It's like they really heard what Jesus was saying, and so they really took to this and followed what was taking place. Man, this is absolutely, this is kind of a brief explanation of what took place. We'll see in Luke, it goes more into details. But I absolutely love this section of Joseph of Arimathea. There's not much about him other than we see that he was a prominent man, he was wealthy, but he loved Jesus. And he had the sense to do this and to take him down and to fulfill the prophecies that took place. And Nicodemus helped him also. Well, I absolutely love this chapter for the fact that this section here, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this was a fulfillment of Psalms. And then we see that Jesus, he breathed his last. It is finished. Now, he says that in John. It's not recorded in Mark, but absolutely huge, because this is monstrous as to what takes place. And God, we absolutely thank you for everything you did for us to be able to be part of your kingdom. And I, so many times when I'm praying, I'm like, Jesus, thank you for what you did, the shame you took. When he was on the cross, it says in Isaiah that you couldn't even recognize that he was even a man. He was just so beaten. But this was also the sickness that was on him. He took every sickness. And so every sickness that we know to mankind was on him on the cross. Absolutely curled him up. It made him look like he wasn't even a man anymore. And yes, he was beat by the Roman soldiers, but this was even more. So anyhow, I've gone over my time again. I hope that you were able to get something from this and even cross-reference with the others. But we've got the next chapter, which we see about Jesus transferring this authority now to the church, which is awesome. So, all right, go out there, be a blessing, have an awesome day, and remember, always stay filled up.